The barrel of Luther Norton's pistol pressed cold against Rebecca's temple as the preacher stammered through the wedding vows, his hands shaking so badly the Bible nearly slipped from his grasp. She stood in the cramped parlor of her father's ranch house outside Johnson City, Texas, wearing a cream-colored dress that felt more like a burial shroud than bridal silk. Her hands clenched so tightly her nails drew blood from her palms. The August heat of 1882 made the room stifling, sweat trickling down her spine as Luther's breath, reeking of whiskey and tobacco, brushed against her cheek when he leaned close and whispered that if she tried anything foolish, he would put a bullet through her younger brother's skull before she could blink. Rebecca's eyes found Samuel, her 13-year-old brother, standing in the corner with Luther's hired gun, a thin man named Colt, gripping his shoulder hard enough to leave bruises. Her father sat slumped in his chair by the window, his face gray and defeated, the mortgage papers Luther held over their heads having crushed whatever fight remained in the old man after her mother's death 2 years prior. The ranch was drowning in debt, the cattle sick, the land parched from drought, and Luther Norton had presented himself as their salvation, offering to clear every penny owed in exchange for Rebecca's hand in marriage. She was 21 years old and had never imagined her life would come to this. "Do you, Rebecca Ann Norton, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" the preacher asked, his voice cracking on every other word. Rebecca's mouth opened, but before she could force out the words Luther expected, a commotion erupted from the barn. One of the ranch hands shouted something about fire, and in the split second that Luther turned his head toward the window, Rebecca made her choice. She stomped her heel down hard on Luther's instep, driving all her weight into the blow, and when he roared in pain and his gun hand wavered, she threw herself sideways, crashing into the small table that held the oil lamp. The lamp shattered, flames spreading across the wooden floor with terrifying speed. Colt released Samuel to grab for his own weapon, but Samuel was quick, diving under the nearest chair and scrambling toward their father. Rebecca did not wait to see what happened next. She ran, her boots pounding across the floor as Luther's furious shouting filled the air behind her. A gunshot cracked, the bullet splintering the doorframe inches from her head as she burst out onto the porch. Her horse, a sorrel mare named Dancer, was tied near the house, already spooked by the gunfire. Rebecca grabbed the reins, yanking them free from the post, and hauled herself into the saddle despite her dress tangling around her legs. Another shot rang out, this one kicking up dirt near Dancer's hooves, and the mare needed no further encouragement. She bolted, racing across the yard and onto the dusty road that led away from the only home Rebecca had ever known. The wind tore at her hair, pulling pins loose until the dark auburn waves streamed behind her like a banner. She rode hard, not daring to look back, her heart hammering so violently she thought it might break through her ribs. Behind her, she could hear shouting, the thunder of hooves as Luther's men gave chase, and she knew with absolute certainty that if they caught her, death would be a mercy compared to what Luther would do. The road stretched endlessly ahead, the Texas landscape rolling out in waves of brown grass and scrub brush. The sun beat down mercilessly, already climbing toward its midday peak, and sweat soaked through her dress until it clung to her skin. Dancer's breathing grew labored after the first few miles, foam flecking her neck, but Rebecca did not dare slow down. She could still hear the pursuit, though whether it was real or imagined she could not tell over the pounding of blood in her ears. She veered off the main road, cutting across open country where the terrain grew rougher. The prairie stretched in all directions, dotted with mesquite and prickly pear, the ground hard and cracked from weeks without rain. Her only thought was to put distance between herself and Luther, to ride until Dancer could go no further, and then to hide wherever she could find shelter. The miles blurred together. The sun climbed higher, then began its slow descent toward the western horizon. Rebecca's throat burned with thirst, her lips cracking, but she had brought nothing with her, no water, no food, no supplies of any kind. She had only the clothes on her back and the desperate need to survive. As evening approached, casting long shadows across the land, Rebecca spotted a ranch in the distance. It was modest, a single-story house with a barn and a few outbuildings, corrals holding horses that lifted their heads to watch as she approached. She slowed Dancer to a walk, the mare's sides heaving, her own body trembling with exhaustion and fear. The ranch appeared quiet, no signs of movement in the yard. Rebecca circled around, keeping to the far side of the barn, and when she was certain no one was watching, she dismounted, her legs nearly buckling beneath her. She led Dancer into the shadowy interior of the barn, the smell of hay and horses enveloping her like a physical thing. The barn was neat and well-maintained, the stalls clean, tools hanging in organized rows along the walls. A ladder led up to a hayloft, and without thinking, Rebecca climbed, pulling herself up rung by rung until she reached the top. Hay was piled high, golden and sweet-smelling, and she burrowed into it like a wounded animal seeking refuge, pulling it over herself until she was hidden from sight. Only then did she allow herself to weep, silent tears streaming down her face as her body shook with the force of everything she had held back during the desperate flight. She thought of Samuel, prayed he was safe, wondered if the fire had been contained or if the whole ranch house had burned. She thought of her father and felt a surge of anger alongside the grief. He should have protected her, should have found another way, but instead he had been willing to sell her to Luther Norton, like she was no more valuable than a head of cattle. The hay was warm around her, insulating her against the cooling evening air. Exhaustion dragged at her, pulling her down into a fitful sleep despite the fear that still coiled in her chest like a snake waiting to strike. She woke to the sound of footsteps below, boots scuffing against the wooden floor of the barn. Sunlight filtered through the gaps in the walls, telling her morning had come, and she held her breath, pressing herself deeper into the hay. "Easy there, Red," a man's voice said, low and calm. "What have you been up to? You look like you have been running all night." Rebecca realized with a jolt that he was talking to Dancer. She had been so exhausted she had forgotten to hide the mare, and now whoever owned this barn had found her. She heard him moving around, the creak of leather, the soft sounds of him examining the horse. "No saddle sores, so whoever rode you knows what they are doing," the man continued, still speaking to Dancer in that gentle tone. "But you are not from around here, are you, girl? Where is your rider?" Rebecca's mind raced. She could stay hidden, hope he would assume Dancer had simply wandered onto his property, or she could reveal herself and throw herself on his mercy. The choice was made for her when Dancer nickered softly, and Rebecca heard the man pause. "What is it?" he asked, and then, after a moment, "Someone up there." Silence stretched between them. Rebecca closed her eyes, knowing she had been discovered, knowing she had nowhere left to run. When she opened them again, she saw a man's head appear at the top of the ladder, his face silhouetted against the light from below. "Well now," he said quietly, "this is not what I expected to find in my hayloft." Rebecca pushed the hay away from her face, knowing she must look like a wild thing, her hair tangled with straw, her dress torn and dirty. The man climbed the rest of the way up, moving slowly, carefully, like he was approaching something that might spook and bolt. In the better light of the loft, she could see him more clearly. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly where it brushed his collar. His face was tanned from long hours in the sun, his features strong and even, and when he met her eyes, she saw they were a striking blue-gray, the color of storm clouds gathering on the horizon. He appeared to be in his mid-20s, maybe 5 or 6 years older than she was. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice still quiet, non-threatening. Rebecca shook her head, not trusting herself to speak. "Are you in trouble?" This time she nodded, and something in her expression must have told him how serious that trouble was, because his jaw tightened and he glanced back toward the ladder as if checking to make sure they were alone. "My name is Mason Fuller," he said. "This is my ranch. You are safe here, at least for now. Can you tell me your name?" "Rebecca," she whispered, her voice hoarse from thirst and crying. "Rebecca Norton." He nodded slowly, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a canteen, offering it to her. She took it with shaking hands and drank deeply, the water the most wonderful thing she had ever tasted despite being lukewarm. "When did you last eat?" Mason asked. "Yesterday morning," Rebecca admitted. "All right. Can you climb down from here? I will get you some food, and we can talk about whatever situation you have found yourself in." Rebecca hesitated, studying his face. He seemed genuine, his expression open and concerned rather than calculating. She had always prided herself on being able to read people, and everything about Mason Fuller suggested he was exactly what he appeared to be. A decent man who had found a stranger hiding in his barn and wanted to help. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "You do not know anything about me." Mason regarded her steadily. "No, but I know desperation when I see it. You did not end up in my hayloft by accident, and that horse of yours has been ridden hard. Someone is either chasing you or you are running from something. Either way, common decency says I should at least feed you and hear your story before deciding what to do next." It was a fair answer, honest and direct. Rebecca nodded and began extracting herself from the hay, brushing off as much as she could before following Mason down the ladder. Her legs protested, muscles screaming from the hard ride and the uncomfortable night in the loft, but she managed to reach the ground without falling. In the full light of day, Mason's ranch looked even more modest than it had seemed the night before, but everything was well tended and orderly. The house was small but sturdy, the corrals in good repair, a vegetable garden growing near the back porch. "I do not have much," Mason said as he led her toward the house. "It is just me here most of the time. I have a couple of ranch hands who come by during roundup and branding season, but right now it is just me and the horses." He opened the door and gestured for her to enter. The interior was simple but clean, a main room that served as both kitchen and living area with a table and chairs, a cast iron stove, and a few shelves holding supplies. A doorway led to what she assumed was a bedroom. "Sit," Mason said, pulling out a chair for her. "I will make you something to eat." Rebecca sank into the chair gratefully, watching as he moved around the small kitchen with efficient movements. He built up the fire in the stove, set a pot of coffee to boil, and began frying eggs and bacon in a heavy skillet. The smell made her stomach growl audibly, and she pressed a hand to it, embarrassed. Mason glanced over his shoulder and smiled, the expression transforming his serious face into something warmer. "Sounds like I am just in time. How do you take your coffee?" "Black is fine," Rebecca said. He poured her a cup and brought it to the table along with a plate piled with food. Then he made himself a plate and sat down across from her, watching as she began to eat. She tried to pace herself, but hunger won out and she devoured everything in front of her with undignified speed. "There is more if you want it," Mason offered. Rebecca shook her head, already feeling better with food in her stomach. "Thank you, you are very kind." "So," Mason said, wrapping his hands around his coffee cup, Are you ready to tell me what happened?" Rebecca took a deep breath and began to speak. She told him about her father's debts, about Luther Norton and his offer to clear everything in exchange for marriage, about the gun to her head during the ceremony and her desperate escape. Mason listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as the story unfolded. "This Luther Norton," he said when she finished. "He is from Johnson City. He owns a spread about 10 miles outside of town," Rebecca said. "The Norton Ranch is one of the biggest in the area. Luther is not a man who takes kindly to being defied. He will be looking for me." Mason nodded slowly. "How far did you ride?" "I do not know exactly. I left the road after a few miles and just kept going. It felt like forever." "If you headed west from the Norton place, you probably covered about 20 miles before you got here. That is good. It means you have some breathing room." He paused, studying her face. "What do you want to do? I can take you to town, find you a place to stay, maybe see if the marshal can help." Rebecca laughed bitterly. "The marshal is Luther's cousin. There is no help for me in Johnson City." "Then what? You cannot just keep running forever." "I know," Rebecca said, feeling the weight of her situation pressing down on her again. "I do not know what to do. I just knew I could not marry him. I would rather die than belong to Luther Norton." Mason was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming thoughtfully against his coffee cup. Finally, he said, "You can stay here, at least for a few days until you figure out your next move. I have a spare room and you will be safe. Luther Norton does not know me and has no reason to come looking here." "Why would you do that?" Rebecca asked. "You do not owe me anything." "No," Mason agreed. "But I do not like the idea of a woman being forced into marriage at gunpoint, and I especially do not like the idea of sending you back out there with nowhere to go. If you want to stay, you are welcome. If you want to move on, I will help you with that too. But right now, you look like you could use some rest and a chance to think." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes again, overwhelmed by his kindness. "Thank you," she whispered. "I do not know how I will ever repay you." "I am not asking for repayment," Mason said firmly. "Just stay out of sight for a few days while we figure this out. If anyone comes around asking questions, you hide." "Understood." Rebecca nodded and Mason stood, collecting their empty plates. "The bedroom is through there," he said, gesturing to the doorway. "There is a bed, clean sheets. Get some real sleep. You look exhausted." She was exhausted, bone deep and soul weary. Rebecca stood on shaking legs and made her way to the bedroom. It was small and sparse, containing a bed, a dresser, and a washstand with a basin and pitcher. The bed looked impossibly inviting, and she barely had the energy to pull off her boots before collapsing onto the mattress. Sleep claimed her immediately, deep and dreamless. When Rebecca woke, the light coming through the window suggested it was late afternoon. She sat up slowly, disoriented, before remembering where she was. Her body ached, muscles protesting every movement, but she felt more clear-headed than she had since the nightmare began. She found fresh water in the pitcher and washed her face and hands, doing what she could to make herself presentable. Her dress was a disaster, torn and stained, and she wished desperately for something clean to wear. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Mason sitting at the table, mending a piece of tack. He looked up as she entered and set his work aside. "Feeling better?" he asked. "Much better, thank you. What time is it?" "About 4 in the afternoon. You slept most of the day." Mason stood and moved to the stove, where a pot of stew had been simmering. "Are you hungry?" Rebecca realized she was ravenous again. "Yes, please." They ate together in companionable silence, and Rebecca found herself studying Mason when she thought he was not looking. He had a quiet strength about him, an easy confidence that came from a man comfortable in his own skin. His hands were calloused and scarred from hard work, and she noticed he wore no wedding ring. "Can I ask you something?" Rebecca said as they finished eating. "Of course." "Why are you here alone? No wife, no family?" Mason's expression grew distant. "I was married once. Sarah. She died 3 years ago, complications from childbirth. The baby did not make it either." "I am so sorry," Rebecca said, feeling awful for asking. "It was a long time ago," Mason said, though his voice suggested the wound was still tender. "I threw myself into building this place after that. Needed something to focus on besides the grief. It has been good for me, I think, having the work." "It is a beautiful ranch," Rebecca said honestly. "You should be proud of what you have built." "Thank you." Mason cleared the dishes, then said, "I need to see to the horses before dark. You should stay inside, out of sight. I have not seen anyone around, but better safe than sorry." Rebecca agreed and spent the evening exploring the small house, looking for ways to make herself useful. She found the ingredients for bread and set about making dough, kneading it with a fierce concentration that helped quiet her anxious thoughts. By the time Mason came back inside, she had 2 loaves in the oven and had tidied the kitchen. "You did not have to do that," he said, hanging his hat by the door. "I wanted to feel useful. Besides, you are feeding me and giving me shelter. The least I can do is earn my keep." They fell into an easy routine over the next few days. Mason worked the ranch during the day while Rebecca stayed hidden inside, cooking and cleaning and trying not to think about what might be happening back at her father's place. In the evenings, they would share dinner and talk, carefully at first, then with growing ease. Rebecca learned that Mason had grown up in Tennessee, come west after the war like so many others seeking a fresh start. He had worked as a ranch hand for years, saving every penny until he could buy this small piece of land and build something of his own. He was 27 years old, quiet and thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that emerged when he felt comfortable. Mason learned that Rebecca loved books, that she had taught herself to read from her mother's small collection, and dreamed of one day having a library of her own. She told him about growing up on the ranch, about helping her father with the cattle before his health failed, about her mother's death, and how everything had fallen apart after that. On the 4th day, Mason rode into Johnson City to gather information. He returned in the evening looking grim. "Luther has men out looking for you," he said without preamble. "He is telling everyone you were abducted, that he is organizing a search to rescue you. There is talk of forming a posse." Rebecca's blood ran cold. "And my father, my brother, your father is staying quiet." "Your brother is fine, from what I could gather. The fire was put out before it did much damage." Mason paused, choosing his words carefully. "Rebecca, Luther is not going to stop looking. He has resources, men, and the law on his side thanks to his cousin. You need to decide what you want to do. You cannot hide here forever." "What are my options?" Rebecca asked, though she already knew the answer. "You could keep running, head further west, California maybe, or Oregon. Get far enough away that Luther cannot reach you. Or you could stay and fight, try to expose him for what he really is, though I will not lie to you, that is a dangerous path with no guarantee of success." Rebecca stood and paced to the window, staring out at the darkening sky. "I do not want to run for the rest of my life, always looking over my shoulder, but I do not see how I can fight him. He has money and power, and I have nothing." "You have the truth," Mason said quietly, "and you have me if you want my help." She turned to look at him, surprised. "Why would you put yourself at risk for me?" Mason met her eyes steadily. "Because it is the right thing to do. And because these past few days, having you here, it has reminded me what it feels like to not be alone. I am not going to let Luther Norton drag you back to a life you do not want if there is anything I can do to stop it." Something shifted in Rebecca's chest, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the fire in the stove. She had been so focused on survival that she had not allowed herself to acknowledge the growing attraction she felt toward Mason, the way her heart lifted when he walked into a room, the comfort she found in his steady presence. "What could we possibly do?" she asked. "I have an idea," Mason said. "It is risky and you might not like it, but I think it could work." Rebecca came back to the table and sat down. "Tell me." "We get married," Mason said simply. Rebecca stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What? Think about it. If you are already married, Luther has no legal claim to you. The debt your father owes him still exists, but the arrangement was marriage in exchange for clearing that debt. If you are married to someone else, the arrangement is void." "But that would put you in danger," Rebecca protested. "Luther would come after you. Let him try." "I can take care of myself. And once we are married, we take the news to the territorial court, make sure it is all legal and binding. Luther can bluster all he wants, but if the law says you are my wife, there is nothing he can do about it." Rebecca's mind raced. It was insane, impulsive, and yet it made a strange kind of sense. "You would do that. Tie yourself to me legally when we barely know each other." Mason reached across the table and took her hand, his touch gentle. "Rebecca, I have not felt this alive in 3 years. Having you here has been like waking up from a long sleep. I know it is fast, and I know this is not the romantic proposal you probably dreamed of as a girl. But I care about you. I want to help you, and if marriage is the way to do it, then I am willing. We can make it a real marriage or just a legal arrangement to protect you, whatever you are comfortable with. But either way, I promise I will keep you safe." Rebecca looked down at their joined hands, her heart pounding. She thought about the alternative, about running and hiding, about spending her life afraid. Then she thought about the past few days, about the ease and comfort she had found with Mason, about the way he made her laugh even in the midst of her fear. "All right," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Let us do it. Let us get married." Mason's face broke into a genuine smile, relief, and something else, something warmer shining in his eyes. "You are sure?" "No," Rebecca admitted. "But I am tired of being afraid and I trust you." "That has to be enough for now." They made plans that night, working out the details. They would ride to the next town over, a place called Cedar Springs, and find a preacher there. Mason knew a justice of the peace who owed him a favor and would be willing to perform the ceremony quickly and file the paperwork immediately. They would need witnesses, but Mason had friends in Cedar Springs who would help. The next morning they set out before dawn, riding side by side across the open country. Rebecca wore one of Mason's shirts and a pair of his pants, her hair braided and tucked under a hat to make her less recognizable. Dancer had recovered from her hard run and moved easily beside Mason's big bay gelding. The ride took most of the day, but they reached Cedar Springs by late afternoon. It was a small town, smaller even than Johnson City, but it had a church and a courthouse, and that was all they needed. Mason led her to a modest house on the edge of town and knocked on the door. A gray-haired man answered, his weathered face breaking into a smile when he saw Mason. "Mason Fuller, as I live and breathe. What brings you to Cedar Springs?" "I need a favor, Judge Patterson. A big one." The judge's eyes flicked to Rebecca, taking in her unusual attire and nervous expression. "Come inside. Let us talk." Over coffee, Mason explained the situation, leaving out no details. Judge Patterson listened intently, his expression growing stern as he heard about Luther Norton and the forced marriage. "I have heard of Norton," the judge said when Mason finished. "He has a reputation, and not a good one. You are sure you want to do this, Mason? This will make you an enemy of a powerful man." "I am sure," Mason said firmly. The judge turned to Rebecca. And you, young lady, you are entering this marriage of your own free will. I am, Rebecca said. Mason is offering me a chance at freedom and safety I would be a fool to refuse. Judge Patterson nodded slowly. All right then. I will marry you and file the paperwork tonight. It will be legal and binding by sunrise tomorrow. But you both need to understand this is not a game. Once you are married with all the legal and moral obligations that entails. We understand, Mason and Rebecca said in unison. The ceremony was brief, held in the judge's parlor with his wife and a neighbor serving as witnesses. Rebecca stood beside Mason, acutely aware of how surreal the moment was. Less than a week ago, she had been held at gunpoint during a wedding she did not want, and now here she was, willingly marrying a man she had known for only a few days. But when Mason took her hand and spoke his vows, his voice steady and sure, Rebecca felt something settle in her chest. This was right. She did not know how she knew it, but she did. When it came time for her vows, she looked into Mason's eyes and spoke from the heart. I promise to be a true and faithful wife to you, Mason Fuller. I promise to stand by your side through whatever comes, and to honor the gift you have given me today. Judge Patterson pronounced them husband and wife, and Mason leaned in to kiss her gently. It was chaste and brief, but it sent a shiver down Rebecca's spine nonetheless. Mrs. Patterson insisted they stay for dinner, a hearty meal that reminded Rebecca of happier times before her mother's death. As they ate, the judge explained that he would file the marriage certificate with the territorial clerk first thing in the morning, making it a matter of public record. Luther Norton will hear about this within a few days, the judge warned. You should be prepared for him to make trouble. Let him come, Mason said quietly. Rebecca is my wife now. I will protect her. They stayed the night at the judge's house, Rebecca sleeping in the guest room while Mason made do with a bedroll on the floor of the parlor. In the morning, they thanked the Pattersons profusely and began the ride back to Mason's ranch. The journey felt different now. Rebecca was no longer a fugitive hiding in fear. She was Rebecca Fuller, a married woman with a husband who had sworn to protect her. The change in her legal status felt monumental, even if the marriage itself was still so new and undefined. When they arrived back at the ranch, Mason helped her dismount and said, I have been thinking. We should probably discuss the sleeping arrangements. I do not want you to feel uncomfortable. Rebecca felt her cheeks heat. I appreciate that. I think perhaps we should continue as we have been for now, until we both feel ready to change things. That sounds wise, Mason agreed, though Rebecca thought she detected a hint of disappointment in his eyes. They settled back into their routine, but everything felt subtly different now. Rebecca caught herself watching Mason more often, noticing the way his muscles moved when he worked, the sound of his laugh, the gentleness in his touch when their hands accidentally brushed. She found herself wanting to be near him, seeking out reasons to stand close, to talk, to share space. A week after their marriage, as they were washing dishes together after dinner, Mason said, I need to tell you something. Rebecca's heart leapt into her throat. What is it? I saw one of Luther's men in town today. He was asking questions about you, showing people a description. I played dumb, said I had not seen any strange women around, but Rebecca, he was getting close. It is only a matter of time before someone mentions seeing us together in Cedar Springs. What do we do? Mason dried his hands on a towel and turned to face her. We could leave, head somewhere Luther cannot find us, or we stand our ground and face whatever comes. But if we stay, you need to know I meant what I said at our wedding. I will protect you, no matter what it takes. Rebecca reached up and touched his face, the gesture feeling both natural and terrifying. I do not want to run anymore. This is your home, our home now. We should stay. Mason caught her hand, pressing it more firmly against his cheek. "Rebecca, I need to be honest with you. This started as a way to protect you, but somewhere along the way, it became more than that for me. These past few weeks, I have felt things I did not think I would ever feel again. I care about you deeply, and I do not want this to be just a marriage of convenience anymore." Rebecca's breath caught. "I feel the same way. I tried to keep some distance, but Mason, you have been so kind, so good to me. I think I am falling in love with you." The words hung between them for a heartbeat, and then Mason pulled her close, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was nothing like the chaste peck they had shared at their wedding. This kiss was passionate and desperate, filled with all the longing they had both been holding back. Rebecca melted into him, her arms wrapping around his neck as she kissed him back with equal fervor. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Mason rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too. I think I have since the moment I saw you in my hayloft, looking so fierce and frightened all at once." Rebecca laughed, the sound watery with emotion. "I was terrified, I still am sometimes, but not when I am with you." They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other until Mason pulled back slightly and said, "Rebecca Fuller, would you do me the honor of sharing my bed tonight? As my wife, in truth?" "Yes," Rebecca whispered. "I want that very much." Mason took her hand and led her to the bedroom, and for the first time since their marriage, they did not sleep apart. They came together with tenderness and passion, learning each other's bodies, discovering the ways they fit together. Rebecca had been frightened of this intimacy, her only frame of reference being Luther Norton's crude advances, but with Mason, everything was different. He was gentle and patient, making sure she felt safe and cherished, and when they finally joined together completely, Rebecca felt a sense of rightness that went beyond the physical. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, Mason's fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I never thought I would have this again," he murmured. "Love, connection, partnership. Thank you for giving me that gift." "Thank you for saving me," Rebecca replied, "for seeing me as more than a problem to be solved." They fell asleep in each other's arms, and for the first time since she had fled her father's ranch, Rebecca slept without nightmares. The confrontation they had been expecting came 2 weeks later. Rebecca was in the kitchen, making bread, when she heard the thunder of approaching horses. She looked out the window and saw 6 men riding into the yard, Luther Norton at their head. "Mason," she called, her voice tight with fear. Mason came in from the barn, took one look at the riders and grabbed his rifle from above the door. "Get in the bedroom and bolt the door," he ordered. "No," Rebecca said. "I am not hiding from him anymore. We face this together." Mason looked like he wanted to argue, but there was no time. He set the rifle within easy reach and stepped out onto the porch, Rebecca beside him. Luther dismounted, his face twisted with fury. "Mason Fuller, is it? I have heard about you. You have something that belongs to me." "I do not have anything of yours," Mason said calmly, "but I do have a wife, if that is what you are referring to. Rebecca Fuller, legally married to me as of 2 weeks ago. The paperwork is filed with the territorial court." Luther's hand went to his gun. "That is not a legal marriage. She was promised to me." "Under duress," Rebecca said, stepping forward, "with a gun to my head. That is not a legal contract, Luther, and you know it. I am married to Mason now, and there is nothing you can do about it." Luther's face turned purple with rage. "You think you can just steal what is mine and get away with it? I will kill you both." "Go ahead and try," Mason said, his voice still calm but carrying an edge of steel. "But know that if you pull that gun, you will be committing murder in front of 5 witnesses. My wife and I are legally married, which means any threat against us is a threat against a lawful union." You can take your grievances to court if you like, but drawing a weapon here will only land you in jail or worse." Luther's hand hovered over his gun, his breathing ragged. The men behind him shifted uncomfortably, clearly not eager to be part of a killing over a woman who was legally married to someone else. "Luther," one of the men said quietly, "Fuller is right, we should go." "Shut up," Luther snarled. He glared at Rebecca with such hatred that she had to resist the urge to step back. "You will regret this, both of you, I will make sure of it." "Is that a threat?" Mason asked. "Because if it is, I will be happy to ride to town and report it to the territorial marshal. He might have more authority than your cousin in Johnson City." Luther spat in the dirt, then swung back onto his horse. "This is not over," he growled, and then he wheeled his horse around and galloped away, his men following. Rebecca and Mason stood on the porch until the riders were out of sight, and then Rebecca's legs gave out. Mason caught her, holding her close as she trembled. "It is all right," he murmured. "He is gone. You are safe." "He will come back," Rebecca said. "You know he will. Maybe. But we will be ready. And Rebecca, you were incredible just now. Standing up to him like that took real courage." Rebecca pulled back to look at him. "I had you beside me. That made all the difference." They went inside and Mason barred the door, a precaution he had not taken before. That night, they lay in bed holding each other, neither of them sleeping much, both listening for the sound of horses returning. But Luther did not come back that night or the next, or the one after that. Days turned into weeks, and slowly the tension began to ease. Mason took to carrying his rifle more often, and they remained vigilant, but life gradually returned to something approaching normal. Rebecca threw herself into making the ranch house feel like a home. She sewed curtains for the windows using fabric Mason bought her on a trip to town, planted flowers in the garden, and spent hours in the evenings reading aloud to Mason from the books he had accumulated over the years. Their marriage deepened and grew, the initial passion settling into something richer and more complex. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, discovered how to navigate disagreements, found joy in the simple routines of daily life together. 3 months after their wedding, Rebecca realized her monthly bleeding had not come. She waited another month to be sure, and then told Mason one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I am with child," she said simply. Mason's face went through a series of emotions, shock, fear, and then overwhelming joy. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Are you happy?" she asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Mason said, his voice thick with emotion. "Rebecca, you have given me back my life, and now you are giving me a family. I could not be more grateful." They made plans for the baby, Mason building a cradle in the evenings while Rebecca sewed tiny clothes. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and as Rebecca's belly grew, so did her sense of security. Luther had not returned, had not made any further threats, and she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had truly escaped his reach. The baby came on a cold February morning in 1883, announced by a pain in Rebecca's back that grew steadily worse throughout the night. Mason rode to fetch the midwife from town, a capable woman named Mrs. Chen, who had delivered dozens of babies in the area. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Mason, pacing outside the bedroom door, thought he would lose his mind with worry. But finally, just as dawn broke, he heard the thin wail of a newborn, and Mrs. Chen emerged with a smile on her face. "You have a son, Mr. Fuller. A big, healthy boy, and your wife did beautifully." Mason rushed into the bedroom to find Rebecca propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle in her arms. He approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at his son for the first time. The baby had a shock of dark hair and a red, wrinkled face, his eyes squeezed shut as he wailed his displeasure at being thrust into the cold world. But to Mason, he was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "What should we name him?" Rebecca asked softly. Mason thought for a moment, then said, "What about Michael? Michael Fuller." "Michael," Rebecca repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Michael it is." She placed the baby in Mason's arms, and he held his son with shaking hands, overcome with the weight of responsibility and love that came with this new life. The next few months were a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings, but Mason and Rebecca weathered them together, learning how to be parents. Michael was a good baby, quick to smile and eager to explore the world around him as he grew. On a warm day in May, when Michael was 3 months old, Rebecca took him outside to sit in the sunshine while Mason worked on repairing a section of fence. She was watching Michael wave his tiny fists in the air when she heard the sound of a rider approaching. Her heart leapt into her throat, old fears rising up, but when she looked up, she saw it was Samuel, her younger brother. He was taller now, no longer the boy she had left behind, approaching 15 and filling out into a young man. "Samuel," Rebecca called, standing up with Michael in her arms. Samuel dismounted and ran to her, pulling her into a careful hug so as not to crush the baby. "Rebecca, I have been looking for you for weeks. I had to see you, make sure you were all right." "I am better than all right," Rebecca said, tears streaming down her face. "Samuel, meet your nephew, Michael." Samuel looked down at the baby with wonder. "He is beautiful. You look happy, Rebecca, truly happy." "I am. Come inside, I want you to meet my husband properly." They went into the house and Rebecca introduced Samuel to Mason, who greeted the boy warmly and invited him to stay for dinner. Over the meal, Samuel filled them in on what had happened after Rebecca's escape. "Father was devastated," Samuel said. "Not because you ran, but because he had put you in that position in the first place. He stood up to Luther after you left, told him the deal was off. Luther threatened to take everything, and he did. We lost the ranch, all the cattle. But you know what? Father said it was worth it. He said he would rather lose everything than see you forced into marriage with that monster." Rebecca wiped her eyes, her heart aching for her father. "Where is he now? Are you both all right? We are working a small farm outside of town. It is not much, but it is honest work and we own it free and clear. Father wanted me to find you to tell you he is sorry and that he loves you." Samuel paused, then added, "He also wanted me to make sure you know that Luther died 2 months ago." Rebecca felt the room tilt. "What?" "He got into a fight with one of his ranch hands over wages. The hand pulled a knife and Luther pulled his gun, but he was drunk and slow. The hand killed him in what the territorial marshal ruled was self-defense. Luther is gone, Rebecca. He cannot hurt you anymore." The relief was so overwhelming that Rebecca had to sit down. Mason moved to her side immediately, his hand on her shoulder, steady and reassuring. "It is over," she whispered. "It is really over." Samuel stayed for a week, helping Mason with work around the ranch and getting to know his nephew. When it came time for him to leave, Rebecca sent him back with a letter for their father, filled with forgiveness and love, and an invitation to visit whenever he could. Life settled into a peaceful routine after that. The ranch prospered, Mason's careful management and hard work paying off in good horses and healthy cattle. Rebecca's days were filled with caring for Michael and maintaining their home, but she also found time to pursue her love of reading, and Mason surprised her one day with an entire crate of books he had ordered from back east. When Michael was 2 years old, Rebecca became pregnant again. This time the labor was shorter and easier, and they welcomed a daughter into the world in the spring of 1885. They named her Sarah, after Mason's first wife, honoring her memory while celebrating the new life they had built together. The children grew, Michael becoming a bright, curious boy who followed his father everywhere, and Sarah a sweet-natured girl with her mother's auburn hair and her father's gray eyes. The ranch continued to thrive, and Mason and Rebecca's love deepened with each passing year. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Mason took Rebecca out to the barn where he had first found her hiding in the hayloft. He led her up the ladder, and there, in the middle of the hay, he had spread out a blanket and set up a small picnic. "I wanted to bring you back to where it all started," he said. "5 years ago, I found the most incredible woman hiding in my hay, and she changed my entire life." Rebecca laughed, remembering how frightened and desperate she had been. "I was such a mess." "You were perfect," Mason said seriously. "You were brave and strong, and you trusted me when you had no reason to. You gave me back my life, Rebecca. You gave me love and family and purpose. I want you to know that every single day I thank God that you chose my barn to hide in." "I love you," Rebecca said, reaching for his hand. "More than I ever thought possible." They lay back in the hay, looking up at the rafters, and Rebecca thought about the journey that had brought them here. The fear and desperation, the courage it had taken to flee, the risk Mason had taken in helping her, and the love that had bloomed between them against all odds. "Do you ever regret it?" Mason asked quietly. "Marrying me so quickly, tying yourself to a stranger?" Rebecca rolled onto her side to look at him. "Not for a single second. You are the best decision I ever made, Mason Fuller." He kissed her then, slow and deep, and Rebecca lost herself in the moment, in the love she felt for this man who had saved her and then loved her so completely. The years continued to pass, marked by small joys and everyday miracles. They welcomed another child, a second son they named Thomas, and watched as their children grew strong and healthy. Rebecca's father eventually sold his small farm and came to live with them in his old age, reconciling fully with his daughter and finding peace in his final years surrounded by family. Samuel grew into a fine young man and eventually married a girl from town, settling on a small ranch not far from Mason and Rebecca's place. The two families visited often, the children growing up as close as siblings. On a warm summer evening when Rebecca was 43 years old and Mason 49, they sat on the porch watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Michael had married and given them 2 grandchildren already, and Sarah was courting a nice young man from Cedar Springs. "We have had a good life," Mason said, his arm around Rebecca's shoulders. "The best life," Rebecca agreed. "I still remember that day I ran, so scared I could barely think straight, and then I found you and everything changed." "We found each other," Mason corrected gently. "And we built something beautiful together." Rebecca leaned into him, watching the children laugh and run in the golden evening light. She thought about the girl she had been, desperate and fleeing from a nightmare, and the woman she had become, loved and secure and surrounded by family. The journey had been terrifying and uncertain, but it had led her exactly where she needed to be. In the barn behind the house, the hayloft where it all began remained, a quiet reminder of the day their lives had intertwined. Sometimes Rebecca would climb up there alone, just to sit and remember, to marvel at how a moment of desperation had transformed into a lifetime of love. The sun set slowly over the Texas prairie, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and Rebecca Fuller, formerly Rebecca Norton, smiled. She had escaped a forced wedding at Gunpoint and ridden west into the unknown. A cowboy had found her hiding in his hayloft. And together, they had created something neither of them could have imagined. A true partnership, a deep and abiding love, and a family that would carry on long after they were gone. It was more than Rebecca had ever dared to dream of during that terrified ride all those years ago. It was everything. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Mason pulled Rebecca closer and pressed a kiss to her temple. "Ready to go inside?" "In a minute," Rebecca said. "I just want to sit here with you a little longer and count my blessings." And that is exactly what they did. Two souls who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built a life worth living, sitting together in the peaceful evening, grateful for every moment they had been given and every moment yet to come. Their love story, born from desperation and courage, had grown into something enduring and true, a testament to the power of trust, kindness, and the willingness to take a chance on love when it appeared, even in the most unexpected places. The Wild West had been unforgiving and harsh, but it had also given Rebecca and Mason the opportunity to write their own story, to choose their own path, and to find in each other a love that would last all their days. From a terrifying flight to a chance encounter in a hayloft, from a hasty marriage to a lifetime of devotion, they had journeyed together through all of it, hand in hand, heart to heart, building something beautiful in a land that demanded strength and courage. And as they finally rose and walked inside together, Rebecca took one last look at the barn where it all began and whispered a quiet thank you to whatever force of fate had led her there on that desperate day so many years ago. It had been the beginning of everything good in her life, and she would be grateful for it until her last breath. The door closed behind them, the light from inside casting a warm glow across the porch, and the ranch settled into peaceful quiet under the vast Texas sky. Their story was complete, a tale of escape and rescue, of courage and love, of two people finding each other when they needed it most and building a life that honored the gift they had been given. And they lived happily, surrounded by love and family, for all the rest of their days.